Good morning. Good morning. A few minutes before church started, Janet came over and said, "Is your microphone on?" And I looked, and it was. And she says, "We can hear you out here." I said, "Oh, okay." I turned it off, and then I had to stop and think about all the conversations I had before church. I think we're all right. Many of you asked me how my back was doing today. Thank you so much. It's doing much better. God healed it. Not to say that it won't go out again, but I had a different perspective on that last night. You know, it flares up and it goes away, and it flares up and it goes away, and I wish it would just go away and not flare up. But I have the opportunity to experience God's healing every time my back flares up. Because every time it flares up, it ends up going away. And I just decided to look at that as I've experienced God's healing hundreds of times. Right on. Okay. Before we get started, I was with Candy this last week up in Cambria, and when she was a little girl, because she's always did the right thing. She's always done the right thing. Drives me nuts. And when she was a little girl, 9 years old, she got baptized. But the Lord's been churning something up in her, and she felt like she wanted to get baptized again. So she was talking to me about it. She says, who can we ask to do it? Who can we ask to do it? And you know who's right up there? You know, our friends Tim and Judy McKee are right up in that area. So we called Tim. "Hey, Tim, Candy wants to get baptized again. Wondered if you would do it." He said, "Sure." You know Tim. He said he's going to say, "Sure, I'd be happy to." He says, "I think there's a church up the street with a heated baptistry." And I says, "Well, Tim, here's the thing. She really wants to be baptized in the ocean." Now, I don't know if you've ever been up to Morro Bay, that area. The water at the beach down here is cold. It's colder up there. So Tim hemmed and hawed a little bit, but you know Tim. He finally said, "You know what? If she wants to be baptized in the ocean, then we'll do it in the ocean." So they did that yesterday, and that was just a great thing. Tim got out of the water, though, and his legs were red with cold. But he's a trooper. He got out there and he did it. I'll bet that was 58-degree water. Yeah, so that's exciting. Okay, we're going to be in Revelation 14 today, and if we can have our first slide, Cynthia. "Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear it and take to heart what is written in it, because the time is near." Sometimes it doesn't seem like it's near enough, but we have to look at things from God's perspective. And to God, a day to him is like 1,000 years to us. That's what it says in his word. And so it's near. I've referenced Daniel's visions a lot as we've been going through this book. Now that we've got some of this book under our belt, and trust me, we're just skimming the surface as we go through this. There's great depths that can be gone to. But now that we've gotten some of this book under our belt, I wanted us to go ahead and look at Daniel's 70-week prophecy. So some of these things will make more sense to us now that we've kind of gone through this much of Revelation, and we'll see more of this as we go through the rest of the book of Revelation. But here we go. Daniel 9, verse 24. 70 weeks. Now remember, these are 70 7-year periods. Okay, so we're talking about an elapsed time of 490 years. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city, to finish transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity. It's another way of saying there's a judgment that's going to take place. To bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy. It means we put an end to visions, put an end to prophecies, because we'll be entering into eternity. And to anoint the most holy. It's when Jesus finally takes control and exercises his reign over everything. So it says, and after 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, talking about Jerusalem, and the end of it shall be with the flood. Remember, we've talked about some references to a flood coming out of the mouth of dragon a few weeks back. Until the end of the war, desolations are determined. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. Okay, this is the week that we're in. And this is talking about Satan and the Antichrist. Till the end of the war, desolations are determined. Then he, in my Bible, this he right here is not capitalized. Usually when you see he capitalized, it's referring to God. In mine, it's not. And I'm not sure that it should be. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. This is talking about the Antichrist comes on the scene as the ruler over one world empire that's going to be in place. And the reason that he's going to get credibility with the people is because he's going to be able to negotiate worldwide peace. He's going to be able to negotiate peace between the Jews and the Muslims and all the different groups that hate each other. He's going to be able to negotiate peace, and that's what's one of the things that's going to give him credibility. But in the middle of the week, remember we talk about the times, and half the time, the 3.5 years. This is what this is talking about. But in the middle of the week, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. That's when everything goes bad. And on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. And what that is a reference to what's referred to in the New Testament as the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. And what scholars seem to agree on is at some point the Antichrist is going to go into the rebuilt temple. Apparently there's going to be a temple rebuilt. And in the place where the Jews make their sacrifices, he's going to do something in there that is an abomination to God. I've heard some people say he may go in there and offer as a sacrifice a pig, which would be a total abomination to God. He may go in there and make the announcement, this is what a lot of scholars believe also, go into this place and make the announcement that he am God, and worship me, okay? Which kind of goes in line with some of the things that we're seeing. So, another interesting thing I want to point out from here is, it says, going back to verse 24, 70 weeks are determined for you and your holy city to finish transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision, prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublesome time. 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Put those together, we get 69 weeks. This is talking about 70 weeks are determined. All right, so that's that 70th week. Like I said, that's the one we're in Revelation. But it says 7 weeks and 62 weeks until Messiah. So scholars and smart people have gone back to the time the decree was given to rebuild Jerusalem. Remember, Israel is being held captive in Babylon for 70 years for not following God's ways. One of the things was they didn't allow their land a Sabbath year of rest every 7th year from planting their crops. God said, you plant your crops, but on the 7th year, the land gets a Sabbath. The land gets to rest. And I can totally understand this. I would be worried that if I skipped a year on my crops, I'm going to have to skip a year on my food. Not believing, not knowing that God is going to take, just like when they get the manna. They were not supposed to collect manna on the Sabbath day. But if they got extra on the day before, it would stay fresh. Any other day, if they got extra, the next day, it was rotten. But on the Sabbath day, God provided for the manna to remain fresh for that day. So that was one of the things that they did. Apparently, how would I put this? God owed the land 70 years of Sabbath rest. Is that a way to put it? So they went 490 years without resting the land. So God says, all right, the land will get its rest. You go into captivity until the 70 years rest for the land is achieved. So they're in Babylon captive for 70 years. So the book of Nehemiah talks about Nehemiah getting permission from King Artaxerxes to go rebuild Jerusalem. Okay, I say all that to say this. Scholars and really smart people have gone back to that date. They can trace that date back to that year, Nehemiah says, in the whatever year it was of Artaxerxes, and the month is when he was given permission to go rebuild Jerusalem. So they checked those dates, and it is exactly, they say it's exactly 69 weeks or 483 years from the time the decree was given to rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince. That date, 483 years later, falls on the day that Jesus made his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. So the belief is, why didn't those Jewish scholars recognize Jesus as Messiah based on this prophecy from Daniel? And that's something to talk about, I guess, something we can debate. I believe it's because he didn't fit the mold. You know, they had their mind made up as to what Messiah would be. He would be a military leader, somebody to set them free from the tyranny of Rome. This guy seems more like a blasphemer than a military leader. He doesn't fit our mold, therefore that's not him. It's just interesting, some of the things that you can get into when we get into this Bible stuff. It's really quite interesting. So, the 69 weeks have been completed. At the completion of the 69 weeks, that's when Jesus made his triumphal entry to Jerusalem. A few days after that is when he's crucified. And then it starts a period between the end of the 69th and the beginning of the 70th. And like I said, here in Revelation, we're into the 70th, and the stuff we're talking about this morning is the second half of that 70th week, where in Daniel starts talking about some of the things that are going to happen in the second half. The first half of what scholars say, the first half of the tribulation is when things are looking good. There's peace. And like I said, the Antichrist gets his credibility. People go, hey, this is the guy. This is the guy we want to lead us. And then halfway through, he changes his tune and starts showing his true colors. So, there you go on that. Now, into Revelation 14, verse 1. It says, Then I looked, since John's still having his vision, and it's John writing and speaking, Then I looked, and behold a Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written on their foreheads. Now remember, back in chapter 7 is when we were introduced to the 144,000, 12,000 sealed from each tribe of Israel. And it's interesting that, well, let's start here. Then I looked, and behold a Lamb standing on Mount Zion. And that word lamb is the same word used to describe the Passover lamb for the Passover celebration. The very same word. Standing on Mount Zion. Gina, I've marked your Bible at Psalm 2. Is there any significance to the Lamb standing on Mount Zion? Now, also listen to this psalm. I'm just going to read it through. You don't have it. I'm just going to read it through. And now that we've gotten our feet wet in Revelation, listen to how much of what we've been reading about in Revelation is here in this psalm. Why do the nations rage, and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord, against his anointed, saying, Let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us. Does that sound like the persecution that we're reading about in Revelation? Verse 4. He who sits in the heavens shall laugh. That makes me laugh, that they think that they can plot something against God. The Lord shall hold them in derision. Then he shall speak to them in his wrath and distress them in his deep displeasure. This is what's coming at the end of the book. Yet I have set my king on my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord has said to me, You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will give you the nations for your inheritance. That's what's coming. And the ends of the earth for your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. We heard that description earlier in the book. You shall dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore be wise, O kings. Be instructed, you judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and you perish in the way, and his wrath, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are those who put their trust in him. It sounds like a description that kind of goes hand in hand with what we're looking at here. Okay. The Lamb standing on Mount Zion. So we're going to hit verse 1 pretty hard, and then we'll start moving, because I just want to show how any part of it, well, almost any part of this book of Revelation, you can dig and dig and dig and dig and get deeper and deeper and deeper. And what we're going to do as we get a little further in today, do some more skimming. I don't know what would happen to us if we dug all the way down to the bottom of every verse in this book. I think we'd still be on chapter 1. And I'd be a crazy man. So, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written on their foreheads. Now, I'm going to get crazy here for a minute. 144,000, chapter 7. we were introduced to the 144,000. Is it actually 144,000? Is it exactly 144,000? It's interesting that introduced to them in chapter 7, and here in chapter 14, John says, I looked and behold a lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written on their foreheads. It's interesting that Jesus still has them all. Does it remind you of a scripture in the New Testament that we might be more familiar with? In John 18, when Jesus is being arrested, and Peter pulls out his sword and strikes that Roman soldier, and Jesus says, oh, put that away, put that away. And what does the Bible say? This was done so that the saying might be fulfilled that goes like this: of all you have given me, I have lost none. That's true with them, and that's true with you. Jesus will not lose you. We will never slip out of the hand of God. Once we are in his hand, once we are his, we are his. And he will not lose one. Of all that you have given me, I have lost none. Now, sometimes I like to look at numbers and look at how God uses numbers and see kind of what God is saying through the numbers. And there's this old preacher in Texas that introduced me to this stuff by listening to him on the radio. And man, there's a lot here. 144,000. So we're going to see the number 144 later on in Revelation. It actually describes the height of the walls in the New Jerusalem, 144 cubits. And there's all kinds of measurements that we're going to come to there, and they know what those measurements meant then. So we're going to actually be able to put feet and inches to the description of the things that are described in the New Jerusalem. And it's really cool. But, okay, 144. There's 12 tribes, 12,000 from each tribe, 144,000. So there's 12 tribes. There's also 12 disciples. Okay? God likes to use the number 12. There's lots of 12s. So there's 12 tribes, 12 disciples. When God uses the number 12, what he's speaking about is perfect government when he uses that number. How can you say that? Okay. I'm just going to blow through this. Jacob had 12 sons. Israel had 12 tribes. Jacob and Israel are the same person. One born of man, and God made Jacob Israel. One born of God. And God governs all of that. The New Jerusalem has 12 gates, 12 foundations. It measures 12,000 stadia. Its walls, as I said, are 144 cubits, 12 by 12. When Jesus was arrested in the garden, he said, I could call more than how many legions of angels? 12. More than 12 legions of angels. So that number 144, 12 times 12, that speaks of a perfection of what the number is representing. So if the number represents perfect government, 12 times 12 represents the perfection of that perfect government. Okay? Now, to the Jew, when they would see the number 1,000, that represents total completion. So when we see 144,000, to the Jew and to the people back in this time, it would mean the total, it almost sounds redundant to say, the total completion of God's perfect government. That's what this is speaking of, because these 144,000 tarry through the time of tribulation and become redeemed through the tribulation. And as we'll see, as well, some of them will die and be able to rest from their labors, but all of them will end up in eternity with God, having come through this period of time. So it's God's perfect government, perfectly completed. That's just that's just like one number. That's one number. God uses these numbers, and like I say, if you see this, if you are a number person and you see the same number, you happen to glance at the clock and it's like, wow, it was 2:15 yesterday when I looked at the clock, and I just happened to glance at it, it's 2:15 again, and those kind of things happen. Start Googling biblical significance of numbers and see the examples of how God uses these numbers. You can translate that to perhaps God is trying to urge you or remind you or nudge you or just let you know something about his goodness over your life. It really is that individual. Another example of the 1,000, God, when Jesus fed the 5,000, okay? 5 is to the Gentile. As the Gentile reads the scripture, God uses 5 when he wants to highlight his grace. Okay? To the Jewish reader, God uses the number 5 when he wants to say something about man. Now, how come they're not the same? How come they don't go together? Well, they do go together. Who needs grace? Man. So you can look at these things both ways, and they still make sense if you're the type of person to sit down and get into stuff like this. So, just an example, again, of how this works. Feeding of the 5,000. 5 is the number of grace, and 1,000 is the number of completion. Could, in the story of the feeding of the 5,000, could we see a picture of God's complete grace, of God's grace being shown in its completion? Now, I just briefly went over this, and I would say yes, because look at how he did it. Who does God show grace to? The humble or the pride, or the prideful? God shows grace to the humble. Okay, who had the 2 fish and the 5 loaves? A little boy, a humble little boy. Okay? So it starts with what a humble little boy had in his small amount. And Jesus takes that and he multiplies it, and then his servants distribute what he multiplies, and everybody gets as much as they want. Right? Jesus will give you as much of him as you want. You get as much as you want, to the full. Everyone ate to their satisfaction. Now, when that was all done, and they started gathering up the baskets of scraps, who can tell me how many baskets of scraps they gathered up? 12. Yeah. It's really pretty cool. God was in charge of that. So in that example, can you see a picture of God's grace, complete grace over that situation? That's the way it works. 144,000. Okay, we're still in verse 1. But let me just throw out one more thing there. Marriage. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be joined with his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Okay? It's 1 plus 1. 2. But the two should become one flesh, so you have to take 2, you have to take 1 away? No. You got to see things from God's perspective. It still works with the math that he created and he taught us. 1 + 1, 2. The two shall become one flesh. What's 1 times 1? When God uses his principles of multiplication, like 12 times 12, he's talking about a completeness, an extra step. So for the two to become one flesh, it's that same thing. It's that principle of multiplication, which brings a completeness, which brings two people into one flesh, which can only be done by God, by the way. Okay, so that's how deep we can go in one verse. And we could keep going, but I know that there's some people who are like, hey, that's cool, yeah, let's keep going. And there's some people like, let's move it on. So I'm trying to ride the middle. Verse 2. And I heard a voice from heaven, like the voice of many waters, and like the voice of loud thunder. And I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. Heard the sound of harpists playing their harps in heaven. This is interesting. That word harps, you go back to the word in Greek that's translated harps, the word is kathara. Now, if you take that word kathara from Greek and just take that word and translate it to English, do you know what you get? Guitar. I did some, so I Googled this stuff. I'm like, okay, does anybody know what a kathara is? So I Googled up a kathara, and sure enough, they got pictures of these ancient instruments. Josephus, now there's a guy named Josephus that you'll hear preachers talk about once in a while. He was a historian, okay? He was born about 37 AD. So he grew up in the generation right after Jesus resurrected. And he kept pretty detailed information about the history of the Jews. There's all kinds of things in the Bible that can be reinforced by the writings of Josephus. He was not a Jesus follower. He was an observer of what was going on, and that's what he would write down. So he recorded things about the Christians and things that can be reinforced from an outside the Bible source about what was inside the Bible, okay? So he describes the kathara as a 10-stringed instrument. And what it looks like is it's kind of like a harp on the bottom. But it's got a body like a guitar. And instead of one neck coming up out of the middle of the body, it's got two necks coming up on each side of the body with a bridge going across the top. And the strings would go from that bridge down kind of like a guitar, the bottom half like a guitar, the top half like a harp. And you'd play it with a pick. And they would use their fingers up on the strings up here because there was no back. You could reach those 10 strings from the back, and you could manipulate the strings, or you could pluck the strings, and you could play it down here with the pick. Okay? Sounds a lot like a guitar to me. So I go back in the Bible and I said, all right, surely there's no guitars in the Bible. I go back and check. I Google the word guitar in the Bible. No, it's not there. There is an ancient, I say an ancient instrument, it's ancient to us. It's called a lute, L-U-T-E. It's a precursor to a guitar, much smaller. It's like a real fat ukulele, I guess, in its size. But in Psalm, there's reference made to the lute. There's reference made to playing the lute and the harp. Now, you may be more familiar with the lute described as a psaltery, because a lot of us grew up with the translation Then in the psalm it said, play the psaltery and the harp. But it's actually a lute. And that lute, which really resembles a guitar, there's scholars who date that back to, at the latest, 2,000 years BC. And some of them say, no, those were around 3,000 to 4,000 years BC, those lutes existed. So why do I say all that? I just think it'd be cool to see a bunch of angels playing guitar. I really do, and I can't imagine how good that would sound. Can you imagine angels play an instrument? And I'm assuming they're angels. It doesn't say they are. It says they heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. Could that be musicians who were Christians who have died, and in heaven they get to play, because that's what God created them to be, was musicians. But can you imagine an angelic band, how good they must be on their instruments, backed by a choir of at least 144,000. Oh, come on. Come on. Try to imagine that. This is really going to be something. And I heard the voice, her voice from heaven like many waters, and I heard the voice of loud thunder, and I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. Verse 3, and they sang, as it were, a new song before the throne, before the four living creatures and the elders. And no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. Apparently, redemption allows us to learn things that we could not otherwise learn. If you've had the experience of coming to Jesus later in life, and maybe had the experience of looking at the Bible and going, ugh, this is just a bunch of gibberish and it makes no sense. And then you give your life to Jesus and the Holy Spirit comes in, and now it's like, ooh, this is good. It's that sort of thing. The redeemed, only the redeemed were able to learn it. These were the ones who were not defiled with women, for they were virgins. Now listen to this part. I want you to make sense out of this. There's 144,000. These are the ones who are not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits to God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God. Okay, so the 144,000 are 144,000 virgin Jewish men. That's what it says. But the way this book is, God's not going to make it all that simple for us, because he likes us to be able to dig. Right? Why is gold valuable? Why are diamonds valuable? Because they're hard to get. And there's good information that we have to dig out that's hard to get. Very briefly, as the 144,000, we talked about the number. The Old Testament prophets would use the language of the nation of Israel being defiled by women in the context of idolatry. God would say, go into that area, wipe them all out, kill them all, because when the Jewish men intermarried with these pagan women, the pagan women were able to get their Jewish husbands to start worshiping their pagan idols. Okay, so the Old Testament prophets would use this type of language, and we're going to see it again in Revelation 17, that these men of the Jewish nation was defiled by women in the context of idolatry. Could this be saying that these 144,000 are virgins? They've not been defiled by women, meaning they never bowed the knee to the beast or his image. They did not have anything to do with idol worship. They were all in for God. Okay? Is that what it's saying? There's just so much we can think about and go over and consider as we go through this book. And in their mouth was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God. Do you know that that last verse that we just read also describes us? Do you know that you are without fault before the throne of God? Jesus is awesome. Jesus is amazing. He's done everything. And next week, we're going to get into a pretty good picture. I'll give you a teaser. You ready? This is like the cliffhanger, so you come back next week and find out what happened. Maybe some really good insight as to exactly what Jesus was talking about when he said to the Father, "Let this cup pass from me." Okay, we understand the idea of not wanting to drink from this cup of this turmoil and pain and things that were going to be coming. But we're going to get a really good idea, more than an idea, a really good description of what that is next week. But because he did that, all these awful things that are being written about in this second half of the tribulation, this is why a lot of scholars say that the church is going to be raptured by then, because the wrath of God is about to boil over, and the Bible says we're not appointed to wrath. So people, well, the church is not going to be there. God is not going to put his church through the effects of his wrath that he's about to pour out on the world. Okay? But remember, there are other scholars, equally smart, who say, no, the church is going to be there, and the church will go through that. So that's why we don't get into all that. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. If we find ourselves here, we'll recognize what it is, and we will have the name of our God on our foreheads, as is written in this book, of those who refuse to give in and bow to the beast and to take part in the fornication of idol worship and blasphemies. But because Jesus did what he did, we are blameless before the throne of God. Not because you're so great, because Jesus is so great that he took all that for us. Okay? So, would you stand with me, please? If anybody's here has any prayer requests, any needs, if anybody wants to rededicate their life, make Jesus their Savior, take part in baptism, we would love to take care of any and all needs or wants that you guys might have this morning. You can do that. Come forward or raise your hand during this last song.